Alexander Stone jolted awake in his penthouse bedroom, his heart hammering against his ribs. Stone Tower was burning. He stumbled to his floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down. 68 floors below, fire trucks surrounded his building like toy cars. As Stone processed the devastating news, his phone buzzed with an encrypted message. "Your empire burns tonight. Your reckoning comes tomorrow." A friend. Someone had deliberately targeted him. This wasn't random, this was personal. Ready for the complete story? Smash that subscribe button and tell me where you are tuning in from in the comments, and do not forget to share with loved ones. Tomorrow brings another mind-blowing story that's just as unbelievable. Trust me, you will want to be here for it. Alright, let's jump into it. The screaming started at 3:17 a.m. Fire alarm. Stone Tower was burning. Alexander Stone stumbled to his floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down. 68 floors below, fire trucks surrounded his building like toy cars, their red lights painting the pre-dawn darkness in urgent strokes. Smoke was pouring from the 40th floor, the floor that housed Stone Enterprises' main server room. No, no, no. Stone grabbed his phone, speed-dialing his head of security. "Marcus, what the hell is happening?" "Sir, there's been an explosion on 40. Looks like sabotage. Someone planted a device near the servers. We're evacuating the building, but..." Marcus's voice cracked. "Sir, all our backup systems are down. Everything's been wiped." As Stone processed the devastating news, his phone buzzed with an encrypted message. "Your empire burns tonight. Your reckoning comes tomorrow." A friend. Someone had deliberately targeted him. This wasn't random, this was personal. 8 hours later, Stone stood in the temporary command center his team had established in a rented conference room across the street, watching his life's work crumble in real time. Stock prices were plummeting. Partners were calling emergency meetings. The Meridian acquisition, scheduled for 2 p.m., was hanging by a thread. "Sir?" His assistant Jennifer approached with trembling hands. "The Sterling Capital representative is here for the preliminary meeting." Stone barely looked up from the financial reports. "Tell whoever it is to wait. I'm dealing with a crisis." "Actually, sir, it's not whoever. It's Dr. Yvonne Williams herself." Stone's head snapped up. He'd never heard the name before. "Who?" Jennifer's face went pale. "Sir, Dr. Williams is Sterling Capital. She owns it. She's the one bringing the $2 billion to the table." The woman Stone had dismissed as whoever was actually the most powerful person in the room. Without her money, the Meridian deal was dead, and with the server attack, Stone Enterprises would follow. "Bring her in," Stone muttered, trying to compose himself. When Yvonne Williams entered the conference room, Alexander Stone's first thought was that she looked nothing like what he'd expected from a major financial player. At 45, she possessed an understated elegance that seemed to fill the space without demanding it. Her natural hair was styled in elegant locks, and she wore a charcoal blazer that spoke of quiet authority. But it was her eyes that caught Stone off guard, dark, intelligent, and seeing everything. "Mr. Stone." Her voice was warm honey over steel. "I'm sorry to hear about the fire. I hope no one was injured." "No casualties, thank God." Stone stood, extending his hand. "Though I'll be honest, Dr. Williams, the timing couldn't be worse. We may need to postpone." "Actually," Yvonne interrupted gently, "I think we need to move forward. Today. Now." Something in her tone made Stone pause. "Why the rush?" Yvonne smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Because I know who burned down your server room, Mr. Stone. And I know why." The room went dead silent. Stone felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "What are you talking about?" 3 months ago, you fired Rebecca Patterson from your Hong Kong office. Do you remember Rebecca?" Stone's jaw tightened. She was incompetent, couldn't handle the pressure. She was brilliant. Summa cum laude from Wharton, 5 years of stellar performance reviews. But she made one mistake. She questioned your decision to exclude minority-owned businesses from the Meridian supply chain. Called it unnecessarily discriminatory in a company email. That's not. You fired her within a week. Blacklisted her from the industry. Destroyed her career. Yvonne's voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. What you didn't know is that Rebecca Patterson is my goddaughter. The room spun. Stone gripped the edge of the conference table. Rebecca didn't burn down your servers, Mr. Stone. But she did call me 3 months ago, crying, asking what she'd done wrong. And I decided to find out exactly what kind of man had broken my goddaughter's heart. Yvonne opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. 18 months of investigation, Mr. Stone. Every discriminatory hiring practice. Every qualified candidate of color mysteriously passed over. Every board meeting where you've used coded language to exclude undesirable elements from your deals. Stone's blood went cold. That's not actionable. That's business judgment. Oh, I'm not here to sue you, Mr. Stone. Yvonne's smile was razor-sharp now. I'm here to buy you. She slid a document across the table. Stone's hands shook as he read it. This is a purchase agreement for Stone Enterprises. All of it. Every building, every contract, every subsidiary. I'm offering you exactly what it's worth after this morning's stock collapse. $47 million. 47 million? Stone's voice cracked. This company is worth $12 billion. Was worth $12 billion. Before someone leaked your discriminatory practices to the SEC, the Justice Department, and the New York Times. Before your servers mysteriously caught fire, destroying evidence you'll need for the investigations. Before your biggest partners started canceling contracts. Yvonne pulled out her phone and showed Stone the screen. The headline made his knees buckle. Stone Enterprises under federal investigation for systematic discrimination. The story goes live in 6 hours, she said quietly. Unless you sign this agreement and transfer controlling interest in your company to me. In which case, I'll be the one dealing with the investigations. I'll be the one rebuilding your reputation. I'll be the one deciding whether Alexander Stone has a future in business. Stone stared at the woman who had just orchestrated the complete destruction of his empire in less than 12 hours. You planned all of this. The fire, the leak, the timing. I plan to give you a choice, Mr. Stone. Sign over your company to someone who won't use it as a weapon of discrimination, or watch it burn completely. Rebecca didn't deserve what you did to her. And frankly, neither did the dozens of other qualified people you've excluded over the years simply because they didn't look like you. Stone's hands trembled as he picked up the pen. Everything his grandfather had built, everything his father had expanded, everything he'd spent his life growing, reduced to a $47 million buyout by a woman whose name he hadn't even known that morning. Why $47 million? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Because that's exactly what you offered Rebecca as a settlement to keep quiet about her wrongful termination. She turned it down, said her integrity wasn't for sale. Yvonne's eyes never left his face. I thought you might appreciate the irony. Stone looked at the signature line. His entire legacy balanced on the tip of a pen. What happens to me if I sign this? That depends entirely on what kind of man you choose to become, Mr. Stone. The question is, are you ready to find out? Before we continue the story, kindly make sure you have clicked on the subscribe button. This motivates me to bring you more beautiful stories like this. Now let's continue. The pen felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in Alexander Stone's hand. For 30 seconds, the only sound in the conference room was the distant wail of sirens and the soft hum of the building's air conditioning. Yvonne Williams sat perfectly still across from him, her dark eyes steady and unblinking. She wasn't gloating. Somehow, that made it worse. Stone set the pen down without signing. No. The word came out stronger than he felt. Yvonne's eyebrow arched slightly, but she didn't speak. I said no. Stone pushed the contract back across the table. You want to destroy me? Fine. But I'm not going to hand you my company and pretend it's justice. Mr. Stone, don't. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You think you're some kind of avenging angel? You orchestrated a terrorist attack on my building. You manipulated federal agencies. You've spent 18 months plotting to destroy the livelihood of thousands of my employees, people who never did anything to your goddaughter except work for the wrong company. Yvonne's composure cracked for the first time. Those employees will be fine under new management. Better than fine. They'll work for a company that actually values diversity. That what? That puts people in positions based on skin color instead of qualifications. Stone's voice rose, years of buried resentment spilling out. You want to lecture me about discrimination while you systematically target me because I'm white. The accusation hung in the air like a slap. Yvonne stood slowly, her movements controlled but tense. Is that what you think this is about? Isn't it? Stone gestured at the folder of evidence. 18 months of investigation. You didn't look into my business practices. You looked for evidence of racism. You decided I was guilty before you had any proof. I had Rebecca's testimony. You had one disgruntled employee's version of events. Stone's confidence was building, fed by righteous anger. Rebecca Patterson was fired because she couldn't handle pressure, not because of her race. The fact that you immediately assumed discrimination says more about your prejudices than mine. Yvonne's hands clenched into fists. My prejudices? You see racism everywhere because that's what you're looking for. It's easier than admitting that sometimes people fail for reasons that have nothing to do with the color of their skin. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. When Yvonne spoke again, her voice was deadly quiet. Rebecca Patterson graduated summa cum laude from Wharton with a 3.97 GPA. She spoke 4 languages fluently. She increased your Hong Kong division's profits by 23% in her first year. Her performance reviews were flawless until the day she questioned your supply chain decisions. Performance reviews can be inflated. She was offered positions at Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Deutsche Bank within a week of you firing her. Yvonne's voice cut through his protests like a blade. All 3 firms called me personally to recommend her. So tell me again about her qualifications, Mr. Stone. Stone felt his certainty wavering, but pride wouldn't let him back down. Even if that's true, one case doesn't prove a pattern. Jerome Washington, MIT graduate, petroleum engineering. Applied for your energy division 3 times. Never got an interview despite being more qualified than the candidates you hired. I don't remember. Keisha Johnson, Harvard Law, corporate litigation specialist. Your legal team recommended her for partner track. You blocked it. Stone's mouth went dry. That's not. David Chun, Stanford MBA, speaks Mandarin and Cantonese. Perfect for your Asian expansion. You hired his white classmate instead, even though David's thesis was on Southeast Asian markets. Each name hit like a physical blow. Stone remembered them all, not because of their qualifications, but because of the vague discomfort he'd felt during their interviews. The sense that something was off about them, the gut feeling that they wouldn't fit the culture. Those were business decisions. Those were racist decisions dressed up as business judgment. Yvonne's voice was steel now. And the fact that you can't even see it proves exactly why this company needs to be taken from you. Stone's phone buzzed. A text from his daughter Rebecca. Dad, please tell me the news stories aren't true. Please tell me you're not who they're saying you are. The message hit harder than anything Yvonne had said. His own daughter, the person who knew him best, was doubting him. You did this, he said quietly, looking up at Yvonne. You poisoned my own daughter against me. I didn't have to poison anyone, Mr. Stone. I just told the truth. Stone's assistant Jennifer knocked and entered without waiting for permission. Her face was pale, and her hands were shaking. "Sir? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to ask you something." Stone turned to her, grateful for any distraction from Yvonne's piercing gaze. Jennifer had worked for him for 8 years, loyal, efficient, discreet. If anyone would stand by him, it would be her. "What is it, Jennifer?" She took a shaky breath. "Sir, is it true that you blocked Marcus Thompson's promotion last year because you said the board wasn't ready for that kind of diversity?" The question hit Stone like a punch to the gut. Marcus Thompson, his head of security, the man who'd been with the company for 12 years, who'd saved Stone's life during a hostage situation in Jakarta, who'd been promised a promotion to vice president of corporate security. "Jennifer, that's not. The context was different. Because Marcus is my fiancé, sir." Jennifer's voice cracked. "And he's been blaming himself for not getting promoted. He thinks he's not good enough. He's been working 18-hour days trying to prove himself, and all this time." She couldn't finish the sentence. Stone watched 8 years of trust and respect crumble in Jennifer's eyes. "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm tendering my resignation. Effective immediately." Jennifer placed her company phone and badge on the table and walked out without another word. The door's soft click echoed like a gunshot. Stone slumped back into his chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 52 years. Across the table, Yvonne Williams watched him with something that might have been pity. "This isn't about revenge, Mr. Stone," she said quietly. "It's about accountability. For Rebecca, for Marcus, for all the brilliant people you've dismissed because they didn't look like success to you." Stone stared at the contract on the table. The signature line seemed to mock him. "And if I sign this? What happens to me? That's up to you. You can disappear, live quietly on your 47 million, and pretend none of this ever happened. Or, for the first time since she'd entered the room, Yvonne's expression softened slightly. Or you can stay. Work for me. Learn what you should have learned decades ago about building a business that serves everyone, not just people who look like you. It won't be easy. You'll start at the bottom, junior consultant, maybe. You'll have to prove yourself to people you once dismissed. You'll have to confront every assumption you've ever made about worth and merit and deserving." Stone's pride recoiled at the suggestion. "You want me to work for you? As a subordinate? I want you to have the chance to become someone your daughter can be proud of again." The words hit their target with surgical precision. Stone thought of Rebecca's text, of the disappointment in her message, of Jennifer's broken trust, of Marcus Thompson working 18-hour days to prove himself worthy of a promotion that was blocked not by his performance, but by Stone's prejudice. His phone rang. The caller ID showed his lawyer, James Crawford. "I have to take this," Stone muttered, stepping away from the table. "Alexander." Crawford's voice was grim. "We have a problem. 3 major investors just pulled out of the Meridian deal. They're citing ethical concerns about partnering with Stone Enterprises. Can we find replacement funding? Not in 3 hours. And Alexander, there's something else. The Times is running a follow-up story tomorrow. They have recordings." Stone's blood went cold. "What kind of recordings?" "Board meetings. Executive calls. Someone's been recording you for months, maybe years. The quotes they're planning to publish, they're bad, Alexander. Really bad." Stone closed his eyes, remembering carelessly cruel comments made in what he'd thought were private conversations. Jokes about diversity hires. Casual dismissals of qualified candidates. Words he'd never dreamed would see the light of day. How bad? Crawford's pause told him everything he needed to know. Career-ending bad. Maybe criminal, depending on what the Justice Department decides to do with the discrimination investigation. Stone hung up and turned back to face Yvonne Williams. She was still sitting calmly at the table, the contract waiting between them like a bridge to an uncertain future. "You recorded me," he said. "It wasn't a question. I recorded your public meetings. Your conference calls with investors. Your presentations to the board. Yvonne's voice held no apology. Everything I have was said in contexts where other people were present. I just made sure there was an accurate record. Stone felt the walls closing in from all sides. His company was hemorrhaging money and reputation. His employees were abandoning him. His daughter questioned who he really was. And the woman sitting across from him held all the cards. But even cornered, even facing the complete destruction of everything he'd built, Alexander Stone's pride wouldn't let him surrender easily. "You know what I think?" he said, sitting back down across from Yvonne. "I think you're not as noble as you pretend to be. You talk about justice and accountability, but what you really want is power. You want to take a white man's company and parade it around like a trophy." Yvonne's eyes flashed, but her voice remained level. "Is that what you need to tell yourself to sleep at night? I think you've been planning this for longer than 18 months. I think you've been looking for a target, a successful white businessman you could take down and make an example of. Rebecca's firing just gave you the excuse you needed. Mr. Stone, I think you're just as prejudiced as you claim I am. The only difference is that your prejudice is socially acceptable now." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment, something dangerous flickered in Yvonne's eyes, hurt, anger, and something else Stone couldn't quite identify. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My father was a janitor, Mr. Stone. He cleaned office buildings for 40 years, including 3 years in this very tower. He died of a heart attack when I was 16, brought on by the stress of working 3 jobs to keep me in private school." Stone opened his mouth to respond, but Yvonne held up a hand. "The night before he died, he told me something I've never forgotten. He said, 'Yvonne, someday you're going to have power. When that day comes, remember, power isn't about who you can hurt. It's about who you can help.'" She stood and walked to the window, looking down at the street where her father had once worked. "So yes, Mr. Stone, I have been planning this for longer than 18 months. I've been planning it my whole life. Not to destroy you, to save the people you've been destroying, to give them the chances my father never had." She turned back to face him, and Stone was surprised to see tears in her eyes. "But if you think that makes me just as bad as you are, then you've learned nothing from this conversation. And maybe my father was wrong about the possibility of redemption. What drives someone to mistake justice for revenge? Is it fear, pride, or something deeper? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective on accountability versus vindication." Stone stared at the contract, the pen, and the woman who held his future in her hands. Outside, storm clouds were gathering over Manhattan, and the first drops of rain began to streak the conference room windows. The choice was his. But for the first time in his life, Alexander Stone wasn't sure he knew how to choose wisely. The storm hit Manhattan like divine judgment. Within minutes of Yvonne's revelation about her father, the conference room windows were being lashed by sheets of rain driven by 70-mile-per-hour winds. The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely as the building's emergency power kicked in. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the building manager's voice over the intercom. "Due to severe weather conditions, the building is now under lockdown. No one is permitted to leave until the storm passes. Estimated duration, 4 to 6 hours. Stone looked at Yvonne across the dimly lit table, emergency lighting casting harsh shadows on both their faces. The unsigned contract lay between them like a challenge neither could walk away from. "Perfect," Stone muttered. "Trapped with my executioner." "I'm not your executioner, Mr. Stone." Yvonne settled back into her chair with the resigned patience of someone who'd learned to wait for justice. "I'm your mirror." Stone's phone buzzed constantly, reporters, investors, employees demanding answers. He turned it face down, but the damage was already done. Through the storm-darkened windows, he could see news vans gathering in the street below like vultures. "They're calling it the Stone scandal," he said, staring at the gathering media circus. "Catchy, don't you think?" You could end this right now. Yvonne gestured to the contract. Sign the papers, hold a press conference announcing your commitment to change. Take responsibility. And what? Pretend to be grateful that you've destroyed my life. I didn't destroy your life, Mr. Stone. I exposed it. The conference room door opened, and a figure stepped through. Marcus Thompson, Stone's head of security, water dripping from his emergency gear. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a young black woman Stone didn't recognize, her professional attire rain-soaked, but her posture defiant. Sir, Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral, I have someone here who needs to speak with you. The woman stepped forward, and Stone noticed her hands were shaking, not with fear, but with barely contained rage. Mr. Stone, she said, her voice carrying a slight accent, my name is Rebecca Patterson. The bottom dropped out of Stone's world. This was Rebecca, the woman whose firing had started everything, who'd called Yvonne crying 3 months ago, who'd refused the $47 million settlement. Rebecca. Yvonne stood immediately, moving toward her goddaughter with protective instincts. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in London. I flew back this morning when I saw the news. Rebecca's eyes never left Stone's face. I needed to be here for this. Stone found his voice. Ms. Patterson, I wasn't expecting to see you. I'm sure you weren't. Rebecca moved closer to the table, her presence filling the room with electric tension. But I decided it was time you and I had a conversation about what really happened in Hong Kong. Rebecca pulled out a tablet and set it on the table. This is the supply chain analysis I presented to you 3 months ago. The one that got me fired. Stone glanced at the screen, seeing charts and data he vaguely remembered. Miss Patterson, I reviewed your work at the time. No, you didn't. Rebecca's voice cut through his protest. You dismissed it without reading it because I suggested including minority-owned suppliers. But let me show you what you missed. She swiped through the presentation, and Stone felt his assumptions crumbling with each slide. The minority-owned suppliers I recommended would have saved Stone Enterprises $23 million annually. Their quality ratings were 15% higher than your current vendors. Their delivery times were consistently better. Stone stared at the data, his mind racing. This can't be accurate. It's been verified by 3 independent consulting firms since my termination. Rebecca's smile was sharp as a blade. Goldman Sachs used my analysis for their own supply chain restructuring. They saved $50 million in the first quarter alone. The implications hit Stone like a physical blow. His prejudice hadn't just cost Rebecca her job. It had cost his company millions in lost savings and improved efficiency. But that's not even the best part, Rebecca continued, swiping to the final slide. Remember the pressure you said I couldn't handle? The reason you gave for firing me? Stone's mouth went dry as he read the screen. Hong Kong division performance, Rebecca Patterson's tenure. Profit increase, 23%. Client satisfaction, 94%, highest in company history. Employee retention, 96%. New contracts secured, $2.3 billion. The pressure I couldn't handle, Rebecca said quietly, was working for a man who saw my race before he saw my results. The room fell silent except for the storm raging outside. Marcus shifted uncomfortably by the door, his loyalty to Stone warring with the evidence before his eyes. Stone looked up at Rebecca, then at Yvonne, then at Marcus, 3 people whose lives he'd affected with decisions he'd barely given a second thought. Why are you here? He asked Rebecca. Why not just let Dr. Williams handle this? Rebecca exchanged a look with Yvonne, some unspoken communication passing between them. Because this isn't just about punishment, Mr. Stone. It's about whether change is possible. Rebecca sat down across from him, her anger giving way to something more complex. Aunt Vonnie has a theory about people like you. Aunt Vonnie. Yvonne's composure slipped slightly, a hint of embarrassment coloring her cheeks. Rebecca's been calling me that since she was 7. Her mother and I were roommates at Spelman. The theory, Rebecca continued, is that some people who discriminate aren't evil, they're just unconsciously incompetent. They've never been forced to examine their assumptions. Stone bristled. I'm not incompetent. You fired your most profitable employee because she suggested a strategy that would have made you even more profitable, Rebecca interrupted. What would you call that? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Stone looked around the room, at Marcus, who'd been denied a promotion he'd earned, at Rebecca, whose brilliance he'd dismissed, at Yvonne, whose father had cleaned the very floors Stone now walked on as owner. Aunt Vonnie thinks you can learn, Rebecca said softly. She thinks that underneath all the prejudice and privilege, there might be a decent man who just lost his way. And what do you think? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, studying Stone's face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex equation. I think, she said finally, that you're about to find out what kind of man you really are. Thunder crashed outside, so loud it seemed to shake the building's foundation. The emergency lights flickered, casting shifting shadows across the contract that still lay unsigned on the table. Stone realized that somewhere in the last hour, this had stopped being about business. This wasn't about corporate acquisitions or stock prices, or even justice, really. This was about 3 people waiting to see if a 4th person could find the courage to admit he'd been wrong. Not just about business decisions, but about the fundamental worth of human beings. The storm's getting worse, Marcus observed from his position by the door. Stone looked at his head of security, the man who'd saved his life in Jakarta, who'd worked 18-hour days trying to earn a promotion that Stone had blocked for reasons he was now ashamed to examine. Marcus, Stone said quietly, about that VP position. Marcus straightened slightly. Sir, you deserved it. You've always deserved it. Stone's voice was barely audible over the storm. I blocked it because I was afraid the board would think I was promoting you for the wrong reasons. I was more concerned about how it would look than about what was right. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Thank you for saying that, sir. It's not enough to say it. Stone looked around the room at the 3 people who held his future in their hands. Nothing I say will be enough until I prove it with actions. Yvonne leaned forward slightly. What kind of actions, Mr. Stone? Stone picked up the pen again, his hand steadier this time. But instead of signing the contract, he set it down and looked directly at Rebecca. Ms. Patterson, if I sign this contract and Dr. Williams becomes the new owner of Stone Enterprises, would you consider coming back? Not as an employee, as a partner. Full equity stake, complete authority over strategic planning. Rebecca blinked, clearly not expecting the offer. Mr. Stone. And Marcus. He turned to his head of security. VP of Corporate Security, effective immediately. With a seat on the executive committee and full authority over all company security protocols. Marcus actually stepped back in surprise. Sir, I don't understand. I'm trying to fix what I broke, Stone said simply. I'm trying to become someone my daughter can be proud of again. The storm raged on outside, trapping them in this moment of possibility and peril, where a man's entire future hung in the balance of choices he'd never thought he'd have to make. The storm showed no signs of abating, and the emergency lighting cast long shadows across the conference room as Rebecca Patterson opened her laptop. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard for a moment before she looked up at Stone. Before we go any further, she said quietly, there's something you need to understand about why this matters so much to all of us. She pulled up a photograph on her screen, a family portrait from what looked like the early 1980s. A young black couple stood proudly in front of a small house, the woman holding a toddler with bright eyes and an infectious smile. That's my parents, Rebecca said. And that little girl is me, age 3, the day my father got his first job as an engineer at Morrison Industries. Stone studied the photo, noting the joy and hope radiating from the young family. Morrison Industries, they were one of our biggest competitors back in the day. Rebecca emphasized. My father, David Patterson, spent 15 years there. He was brilliant, held 3 patents, led the team that developed their revolutionary water purification system. The technology is still being used in developing countries today, saving thousands of lives. She swiped to the next image, a newspaper clipping from 1987. Morrison Industries promotes David Patterson to chief engineer. He was so proud of that promotion, Rebecca continued, her voice soft with memory. He called it his American dream moment. A black man from rural Alabama becoming chief engineer at a Fortune 500 company. Rebecca's expression hardened as she swiped to the next image, another newspaper clipping from 1989. Morrison Industries faces federal investigation. What happened? Stone asked, though something in his gut told him he didn't want to know the answer. Morrison was being investigated for government contract fraud. Nothing my father was involved in. He worked on civilian projects. But they needed a scapegoat. Rebecca's voice turned bitter. Guess who was easiest to sacrifice? The next image made Stone's blood run cold. David Patterson arrested in connection with Morrison fraud case. They pinned it on your father? They destroyed him, Rebecca said flatly. Planted evidence in his office, bribed witnesses to testify against him. He spent 2 years fighting the charges, lost everything, his job, his reputation, our house, his patents. Stone felt sick. Was he convicted? The charges were eventually dropped when the real perpetrators were caught. But by then it was too late. No engineering firm would hire him. He was blacklisted from the entire industry. Rebecca's hands clenched into fists. A man who'd spent his career helping people ended up working as a night janitor to support his family. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Your father, he worked here, at Stone Tower. 3rd shift, Monday through Friday, for 7 years. Rebecca's eyes glistened with unshed tears. He cleaned your office, Mr. Stone. He emptied your trash, vacuumed your carpets, polished the desk where you made million-dollar deals. Stone felt the weight of this revelation settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Rebecca, I had no idea. Of course you didn't. Men like you never see the janitors. Her voice cracked slightly. But he saw you. Every night, he'd come home and tell me about the brilliant white executives who ran the building. He still believed in the system, even after it destroyed him. He still thought merit mattered more than politics. Rebecca pulled out a worn manila folder. This is my father's personnel file from Stone Enterprises. 7 years of perfect attendance, commendation letters from supervisors, no disciplinary actions. She opened the folder and pulled out a handwritten letter. He wrote this to you in 1996, requesting a meeting. He had ideas for improving your building's energy efficiency, innovations that could have saved you millions. He never sent it. Stone took the letter with trembling hands and read his father's careful handwriting. Dear Mr. Stone, my name is David Patterson, and I work the night shift cleaning your offices. I hope you'll forgive the presumption of this letter, but I have some ideas that might interest your company. Before my current position, I was chief engineer at Morrison Industries, where I developed several energy-saving technologies. I've noticed inefficiencies in Stone Tower's systems that could be addressed with relatively simple modifications. The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing sophisticated engineering solutions written in the precise language of someone who understood complex systems. It was the work of a brilliant mind trapped in a menial job, still trying to contribute, still believing his ideas had value. He never sent it because he was afraid, Rebecca continued. Afraid that if you knew a janitor was making engineering recommendations, he'd lose the only job he could get. Stone looked up from the letter, his eyes meeting Rebecca's. What happened to him? Heart attack, 2003. He was 58. Rebecca's voice was steady. but tears were flowing freely now. He died believing he'd failed his family, never knowing that his patents were still saving lives around the world. The room fell silent except for the storm outside. Stone carefully folded the letter and handed it back to Rebecca, but she shook her head. "Keep it. It's yours now." Yvonne spoke for the first time in several minutes, her voice thick with emotion. "David Patterson was my mentor at Morrison Industries. He taught me everything I know about engineering, about business, about integrity. When they destroyed him, I vowed that someday I'd have enough power to make sure it never happened to anyone else." Stone looked between the two women, understanding finally dawning. "That's why you became Sterling Capital. That's why you spent 18 months investigating me." "I spent 30 years building Sterling Capital," Yvonne corrected. "I bought companies, restructured them, made them more inclusive. But I never forgot what happened to David. And when Rebecca called me crying about being fired for the same kind of principled stand her father would have made." "You saw history repeating itself," Stone finished. "Exactly." Yvonne's eyes were hard as steel. "David Patterson died thinking the system would never change, that men like you would always have the power to destroy people like him. I decided to prove him wrong." Marcus cleared his throat from his position by the door. "Sir, there's something else you should know. About my family connection to this story." Stone turned, dreading what he might hear next. "My grandfather, Samuel Thompson, worked at Morrison Industries in the 1980s. He was David Patterson's assistant, one of the only people who stood by him during the investigation." Marcus's voice was carefully controlled. "He was fired for refusing to testify against Mr. Patterson. Spent the rest of his career fighting to clear both their names." The web of connections was staggering. Stone realized he wasn't just facing 3 individuals. He was facing the legacy of systemic injustice that had rippled through generations. "How many others?" he asked quietly. "How many other David Pattersons have I overlooked, dismissed, or destroyed without even knowing it?" Rebecca and Yvonne exchanged a look. Rebecca pulled out another folder, this one much thicker. "We've been tracking that," she said. "Every qualified person of color who applied to Stone Enterprises over the past decade. Every promising career that was cut short by cultural fit concerns. Every brilliant mind that was passed over for someone less qualified but more familiar." She opened the folder, revealing dozens of resumes and photographs. "Meet your invisible workforce, Mr. Stone. The engineers, analysts, managers, and innovators who could have transformed your company if you'd given them the chance." Stone stared at the faces looking back at him from the photographs. Young, old men, women, every shade of brown and black, all with impressive credentials and disappointed dreams. Dr. Keisha Williams, Ph.D. in biochemical engineering from MIT. Applied for your pharmaceutical division 3 times. James Chun, Stanford MBA, expert in Asian markets. Perfect for your expansion plans. Maria Rodriguez, CPA and JD, specialized in international tax law. Could have saved you millions in overseas ventures. Each name was a missed opportunity, a door Stone had closed without realizing it. But more than that, each name represented a life affected by his unconscious bias, a family whose trajectory had been altered by his assumptions. "The total lost productivity," Yvonne said quietly, "the innovations that never happened, the profits that were sacrificed to maintain comfortable homogeneity. We estimate it cost Stone Enterprises over $400 million in the past decade alone." Stone felt dizzy. $400 million? Prejudice isn't just morally wrong, Mr. Stone. It's economically stupid. Rebecca's voice carried the weight of her father's lost years. "You've been running your company with one hand tied behind your back, excluding the very people who could have made you more successful than you ever imagined." The storm outside seemed to be reaching its peak, wind howling around the building like the voices of all the dismissed and overlooked crying for recognition. Stone looked around the room at these three people whose lives had been shaped by the same systematic exclusion that had defined his business practices. "My father left me a letter too," Yvonne said suddenly, reaching into her briefcase. "I've carried it with me for 20 years, waiting for the right moment to share it." She unfolded a piece of paper that had clearly been read many times, the creases worn soft with handling. "He wrote it the night before he died, when he was working his third job to pay for my college tuition." Her voice broke slightly. He said, "Someday, baby girl, you're going to have the power to change things. When that day comes, remember, the point isn't to get revenge on the people who hurt us. The point is to make sure they can't hurt anyone else." She looked directly at Stone. "That's what today is about, Mr. Stone. Not revenge. Prevention." Stone realized that everyone in this room had been shaped by the same forces that had shaped him, just from the other side. While he'd learned that his privilege was natural and earned, they'd learned that their excellence had to be twice as good to be considered half as worthy. The contract still lay on the table between them, and signed, but no longer the most important thing in the room. Stone understood now that this wasn't just about a business transaction. This was about choosing which version of America would prevail, one that perpetuated the cycles of exclusion, or one that finally broke them. "The question," Rebecca said softly, "is whether you're ready to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem." Thunder crashed outside with renewed fury, as if the storm itself was demanding an answer to Rebecca's question. The storm had settled into a steady, relentless rhythm against the windows, and the emergency lighting had dimmed to conserve power. In the softer shadows, the four people in the conference room seemed to exist in a bubble separate from the outside world, a space where pretense had been stripped away and only truth remained. Stone sat back in his chair, David Patterson's letter still clutched in his hands. The weight of the revelations had left him emotionally drained, but also strangely cleansed, like a fever that had finally broken. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the rain. "About my father." Rebecca, Yvonne, and Marcus looked at him with surprise. For the past hour, Stone had been on the receiving end of painful family histories. Now, unexpectedly, he was offering one of his own. "Harrison Stone too built this company on a principle he drilled into me from childhood. Excellence recognizes excellence. He used to say that talent was colorblind, that the best ideas came from the most unlikely places." Stone's voice carried a note of confusion, as if he were trying to reconcile conflicting memories. "What happened to that principle?" Yvonne asked gently. Stone was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "My father died when I was 26. Heart attack, just like Rebecca's father. I inherited the company overnight. No preparation, no gradual transition. Just suddenly, I was responsible for 12,000 employees and billions in assets." He looked up at Marcus. "You know what that's like, being thrown into a situation where everyone's watching to see if you'll fail." Marcus nodded slowly. "The pressure can make you cautious, conservative in your decisions." "Exactly." Stone's voice grew stronger, as if Marcus's understanding gave him permission to continue. "The board was skeptical of my leadership from day one. I was young, untested. Every decision was scrutinized, every mistake magnified. So I started making safe choices." "Safe choices," Rebecca repeated, her voice thoughtful rather than accusatory. "I promoted people who looked like success to me. I hired candidates who reminded me of the executives I'd grown up around. Not because I consciously thought other people were inferior, but because—" Stone struggled to find the right words. "Because familiar felt safer than unknown," Yvonne finished for him. "Yes." The admission seemed to cost Stone something. "I told myself I was being practical, that I was choosing proven quantities over risky unknowns. But really, I was just scared of making a mistake that would prove the board right about my inexperience." Stone looked directly at Rebecca. When you questioned the supply chain decisions in Hong Kong, it wasn't really about the minority suppliers. It was about the fact that you were challenging my judgment in front of the board. You were making me look uncertain, and uncertainty was the one thing I couldn't afford. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. So you fired me to look decisive. I fired you to protect myself. And I told myself you were insubordinate because it was easier than admitting I was insecure. Stone's voice cracked. I destroyed your career to preserve my image of competence. The room fell silent except for the storm outside. Then, unexpectedly, Marcus spoke. Sir, can I ask you something? About the promotion you blocked. Stone nodded, bracing himself. When you told the board you didn't think they were ready for that kind of diversity, what did you really mean? Stone closed his eyes, the memory painful to revisit. I was afraid they'd think I was promoting you because of political correctness rather than merit. I was afraid they'd question my judgment if I put a black man in a senior position too quickly after my father's death. Even though I'd earned it, even though you'd more than earned it, you saved my life in Jakarta, led the team that prevented 3 major security breaches, increased departmental efficiency by 30%. Stone met Marcus's eyes. I knew you deserved the promotion, but I was more afraid of looking weak to the board than I was committed to doing right by you. Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this admission. You know what the hardest part was, sir? It wasn't the disappointment. It was thinking that maybe they were right, maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I was missing something everyone else could see. The pain in Marcus's voice hit Stone like a physical blow. Marcus, you are one of the most competent executives I've ever worked with. The fact that I let my own fears make you doubt your worth is... He couldn't finish the sentence. Yvonne leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. Alexander, can I call you Alexander? Stone nodded, surprised by the informal address. What you're describing isn't unusual. Most discrimination isn't born from hatred, it's born from fear. Fear of change, fear of judgment, fear of losing control. Her voice was gentle but firm. The problem is that fear-based decisions create real harm, regardless of intent. I know that now, Stone said quietly. But how do I fix it? How do I undo 30 years of fear-based choices? Rebecca surprised everyone by reaching across the table and covering Stone's hand with hers. The gesture was small but profound, the first physical contact that wasn't confrontational. You start by understanding something my father never got to learn, she said softly. Redemption isn't about perfection. It's about commitment to doing better. Stone looked down at Rebecca's hand on his, this woman whose life he'd disrupted, offering him grace he didn't deserve. Why are you being kind to me? After everything I've done? Because holding on to anger would make me just like the people who destroyed my father. Rebecca's eyes were bright with unshed tears. And because I believe what Aunt Vonnie taught me, that people can change if they really want to. Yvonne's composure finally cracked, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. David would be so proud of you, baby girl. He always said the measure of a person wasn't whether they fell down, but whether they helped others get back up. The emotional weight in the room was palpable. For people from completely different backgrounds, brought together by circumstances that should have made them enemies, were finding common ground in shared humanity. Stone pulled out his phone and scrolled to a contact he hadn't called in months. My daughter Rebecca, yes, I named her after my father's favorite book. She's been texting me all day. She's ashamed of me. He showed them the latest message. Dad, please tell me there's more to this story. Please tell me the man who taught me that character matters more than success wouldn't have done these things. What are you going to tell her? Marcus asked. I don't know. I want to tell her that her father isn't the monster the media is painting. But I also can't lie to her about who I've been. Stone's voice was raw with pain. She's 25, the same age I was when I inherited the company. She's starting her career as a civil rights lawyer. How do I explain to her that her father became everything she's fighting against? Yvonne stood and moved to the window, looking out at the storm. When my father was dying, he made me promise something. He said, "Don't let what they did to me make you hate them. Hatred only creates more victims." She turned back to face Stone. For 30 years, I've honored that promise by building instead of destroying. Every company I've acquired, every executive I've mentored, every barrier I've broken, it's all been about creation, not destruction. Until today, Stone observed. Until today. Yvonne's smile was sad but genuine. Maybe I needed to remember that sometimes you have to tear down the old structure before you can build something better. Rebecca stood and joined her mentor at the window. Or maybe you needed to remember that the point was never to punish the people who hurt us. The point was to heal the damage they caused. The two women stood side by side, teacher and student, both shaped by the same loss but choosing hope over bitterness. Stone watched them and felt something shift in his chest, not just guilt or shame, but genuine admiration for their strength. "I have a confession to make," Marcus said suddenly. "I've been recording our conversations today." The room went tense. Stone felt his defenses rising instinctively. "Not to use against you, sir," Marcus continued quickly, "but because I wanted to remember this moment. The moment when someone I respected chose to tell the truth instead of protecting themselves." He pulled out a small digital recorder and set it on the table. "Everything we've said today, about fear, about redemption, about the choice between familiar and right, it's going to help other people who are struggling with the same decisions." Stone stared at the recorder, realizing that his words of confession and commitment were now permanently captured. Instead of panic, he felt relief. "Good," he said simply. "Let people hear what cowardice sounds like, so they can choose courage instead." The storm outside was beginning to weaken, the wind's howling reduced to a steady moan. But inside the conference room, something stronger than the storm had taken hold. The fragile but growing possibility that people separated by history and hurt could find their way to understanding. Stone picked up the pen and held it over the contract, but still didn't sign. Instead, he looked around the room at these three people who had shown him more grace than he deserved. "Before I sign this," he said, "I need you all to know something. Whatever happens next, today has changed me. Not because I'm afraid of losing my company, but because I finally understand what my father really meant about excellence recognizing excellence." He gestured to Rebecca, Yvonne, and Marcus. "You are the excellence I've been too blind to see." Dear viewer, what do you think? Is it possible for someone to genuinely change their worldview in a single day, or does real transformation take years? Share your thoughts below. Have you ever had a conversation that fundamentally changed how you see yourself? The pen remained poised over the signature line, but now it felt less like surrender and more like possibility. The storm was weakening outside, but inside the conference room, a different kind of tempest was about to break. Stone's phone rang with a shrill urgency that cut through the moment of fragile understanding they'd built. The caller ID made his blood freeze. "Board chairman, emergency." "I have to take this," Stone said, his voice tight with dread. "Alexander." The voice of Chairman William Blackwood crackled through the speaker, cold and commanding. "Where the hell are you? The board is convening an emergency session in 1 hour. William, I'm trapped in the building by the storm." "Then get untrapped. We've got a situation that makes this morning's problems look like a minor hiccup." Stone's stomach dropped. "What kind of situation?" "The kind where 3 of our biggest institutional investors just filed lawsuits claiming systematic discrimination in our hiring practices. The kind where the Department of Justice is opening a formal investigation. The kind where our stock has lost 60% of its value in 6 hours." Stone looked around the room at Rebecca, Yvonne, and Marcus, all watching him with expressions ranging from concern to resignation. "William, I can explain." You can explain to the board. Assuming you still want to have a company to explain. Blackwood's voice turned ominous. Alexander, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Are the allegations in these news reports true? The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Stone looked at Rebecca, remembering her brilliant supply chain analysis. At Marcus, thinking of the promotion he'd blocked. At Yvonne, whose father had cleaned these very floors. It's complicated, William. That's not a direct answer. Before Stone could respond, the conference room door burst open. Harrison Blackwood, Jr., William's son and Stone's longtime rival on the board, strode in with 2 security guards and a man in an expensive suit Stone didn't recognize. Alexander Stone, the stranger announced, I'm Special Agent Martinez with the Department of Justice. You're not under arrest, but we need to have a conversation about your company's employment practices. What? Stone stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward. I haven't even been formally notified of an investigation. The investigation was fast-tracked due to the severity of the allegations and the evidence that's been provided. Agent Martinez gestured to Harrison, Jr., who was holding a thick folder. Mr. Blackwood here has been very cooperative in providing internal documents. Stone's world tilted on its axis as he realized what was happening. Harrison, what documents? Harrison Jr. smiled with the satisfaction of a man who'd been waiting years for this moment. Email chains, Alexander. Recorded board meetings. Performance reviews that showed clear patterns of bias. Personnel files documenting qualified minority candidates who were mysteriously passed over. You've been collecting evidence against me? I've been protecting this company from your liability. Someone had to document your decisions in case this day came. Harrison Jr. opened the folder and pulled out a sheet of paper. Like this email from last year where you wrote, and I quote, "We need to be careful about the optics of too much diversity happening too fast. The clients might get the wrong impression." Stone felt the blood drain from his face. He remembered that email, sent in a moment of casual prejudice that he'd never imagined would be scrutinized. Rebecca stood slowly, her face pale with anger. "You were worried about the optics of treating people fairly?" "Rebecca, that's not, the context was different." "The context," Agent Martinez interrupted, "is exactly what we're here to discuss. Mr. Stone, we have documentation of a systematic pattern of discrimination spanning more than a decade." Yvonne's expression had gone cold as winter steel. "Alexander, is this who you really are? Even after everything we've discussed today?" "No." Stone's voice cracked with desperation. "That email doesn't represent. I've learned so much today. I understand now." "Understanding doesn't undo the damage," Marcus said quietly, and there was profound disappointment in his voice. "Sir, I wanted to believe that you could change. We all did." Harrison Jr. pulled out another document, this one with Stone's signature clearly visible. "This is a memo from 2018, Alexander. You specifically instructed HR to raise the bar on cultural fit assessments after we hired 3 black executives in 1 quarter. You were literally trying to reverse progress." Stone stared at his own signature, his own words, written in black and white. There was no context that could soften this, no explanation that could justify it. He had been exactly what they accused him of being. "I want to change," he said desperately, looking around the room at faces that had grown cold and closed off. Today has shown you the consequences of your actions," Agent Martinez said firmly. "Mr. Stone, you're going to need legal representation. This investigation is moving forward regardless of any personal epiphanies you might be experiencing." Rebecca backed away from the table, her hand covering her mouth as if physically sick. "I actually believed you. For a moment, I actually thought you were different than the people who destroyed my father." "I am different. I can be different." "No, you're not." Yvonne's voice was deadly quiet. "You're exactly what you've always been, a privileged man who's sorry he got caught, not sorry for what he did. The words hit Stone like physical blows. Everything they'd built in the past hour, the understanding, the tentative forgiveness, the possibility of redemption, crumbled like a house of cards. The 2018 memo proves it, Harrison Jr. continued with visible satisfaction. Even after the Civil Rights Act, even after decades of progress, you were actively working to maintain discrimination. This isn't unconscious bias, Alexander. This is willful prejudice. Stone felt the walls closing in from all sides. The federal investigation, the board revolt, the media feeding frenzy, and worst of all, the look of betrayal in the eyes of the three people who'd offered him a chance at redemption. His phone buzzed with a text from his daughter. "Dad, I just saw the news about the DOJ investigation. Please tell me you're going to cooperate fully. Please don't become another rich white man who thinks the rules don't apply to him." Even his own daughter doubted his integrity. "I need you all to understand something," Stone said, his voice breaking. "That man who wrote those emails, who made those decisions, I don't want to be him anymore." "But you are him," Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. "You are him, and all the pretty words in the world don't change that." Agent Martinez cleared his throat. "Mr. Stone, you have the right to remain silent, but I strongly advise you to cooperate fully with this investigation. Your company is facing potential criminal charges for systematic civil rights violations." "Criminal charges?" Stone's legs gave out, and he collapsed back into his chair. "The pattern of discrimination is so extensive and documented that the Justice Department is considering prosecuting Stone Enterprises under federal racketeering statutes. If convicted, you could face up to 20 years in federal prison." The room spun around Stone. 20 years. His company destroyed. His reputation in ruins. His daughter ashamed of him. And the three people who'd shown him grace, Rebecca, Yvonne, and Marcus, staring at him with the crushing weight of absolute disillusionment. "The contract," he whispered, looking at the unsigned papers on the table. "What about it?" Yvonne asked coldly. "If I sign it, if I give you the company, does that change anything?" Yvonne's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "You think you can buy your way out of accountability? Sign over a company that's about to be seized by federal prosecutors and pretend that makes you a good person." "I'm trying to do the right thing." "The right thing was 30 years ago, Alexander. The right thing was when you inherited your father's principles instead of abandoning them." Yvonne gathered her papers with sharp, angry movements. "The right thing was when you had the power to lift people up instead of keeping them down." She stood and looked down at him with eyes that held no forgiveness, no hope, no possibility of redemption. "My father died believing that people like you could change. I spent 30 years building a company to prove him right. But maybe some people are exactly who they choose to be, no matter how many chances they're given." As if the universe wanted to deliver one last cruel twist, the emergency lighting finally failed completely, plunging the room into darkness lit only by the gray storm light from the windows. In the shadows, Stone could barely make out the silhouettes of the people whose respect he'd lost forever. "The storm's passing," Marcus observed quietly. "We can leave now." One by one, they gathered their things and headed for the door. Rebecca paused at the threshold and looked back at Stone, still slumped in his chair among the ruins of his empire. "I hope someday you understand what you cost us," she said softly. "Not just the jobs and opportunities, but the hope. The belief that people could change, that progress was possible, that tomorrow could be better than yesterday." And then they were gone, leaving Alexander Stone alone in the darkness with nothing but the torn contract, his documented history of discrimination, and the crushing weight of choices that could never be unmade. Thunder rumbled in the distance as the storm moved on, but for Stone, the real tempest was just beginning. 3 hours into the storm lockdown, the emergency lights had dimmed to an amber glow, casting long shadows across the conference room, where 4 lives hung in the balance. Outside, Manhattan was drowning in the worst storm in decades, but inside this sealed chamber, Alexander Stone was drowning in something far more dangerous, the truth about himself. The unsigned contract lay on the table like a death warrant. In the past 3 hours, Stone had watched his carefully constructed world collapse through the rain-streaked windows. News vans surrounded the building. His phone had died from constant calls. His daughter Rebecca had sent 7 increasingly frantic texts asking if the man in the news stories was really her father. But it was the silence from the 3 people trapped with him that was killing him. Dr. Yvonne Williams sat with her hands folded, patient as a judge waiting for a verdict. Rebecca Patterson stared at her tablet, reviewing data that proved Stone's prejudice had cost his company millions. Marcus Thompson stood by the door like a sentry guarding secrets that could destroy or redeem them all. "Mr. Stone," Yvonne said quietly, "the storm is expected to clear in 2 hours. When those doors open, you'll have to face a world that knows exactly who you are. The question is, who do you want to be when you walk out of here?" Stone looked at the contract, $47 million for a company worth $12 billion. The most expensive education in humility ever purchased. "If I sign this," he said slowly, "what happens to my employees? The ones who had nothing to do with my mistakes." "They'll be better protected than they've ever been," Rebecca answered, looking up from her tablet. "Yvonne's companies have the highest employee satisfaction ratings in the industry. Better benefits, better advancement opportunities, better leadership training. Better than I gave them. Much better." Stone turned to Marcus. "And you? If you become VP under new management, will you stay?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Depends on whether new management includes you, sir." "What do you mean?" "Dr. Williams offered you a chance to stay and learn. Question is, are you brave enough to take it?" Stone's dead phone suddenly buzzed to life. Someone had plugged it into the emergency power. The caller ID made his blood freeze. Rebecca Stone, daughter. With trembling hands, he answered. "Becca?" "Dad." His daughter's voice was thick with tears. "Dad, please tell me the news stories are wrong. Please tell me you're not who they're saying you are." The plea hit Stone like a physical blow. He looked around the room at the 3 people who'd become unwilling witnesses to his moral reckoning. "Becca, because if they're true, Dad, if you really did those things, I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can even look at you." Stone closed his eyes, feeling 28 years of being his daughter's hero crumble in real time. Rebecca, brilliant, idealistic Rebecca who'd dedicated her life to civil rights law because she'd thought her father was a good man who'd taught her about justice. "The stories are true, sweetheart." The silence on the other end lasted forever. "All of it?" she whispered. "All of it." He heard her crying then, quiet, heartbroken sobs that cut deeper than any business loss ever could. "Why, Dad? Why would you hurt people like that?" It was the question that mattered most, and Stone realized he'd never honestly asked it of himself. "Because I was scared," he said finally. "Scared that if I let everyone compete on equal terms, I might not be as special as I thought I was. Scared that success I'd attributed to my own merit might have had more to do with who I excluded than who I was. Dad, I was a coward, Becca. I built walls instead of bridges because walls felt safer. I hurt good people because I was too proud to admit I might be wrong about anything." Across the table, Yvonne Williams was watching him with something that might have been hope. "Can you fix it?" Rebecca asked, her voice small and broken. Stone looked at the contract, at the pen, at the 3 people who'd orchestrated his downfall, and somehow still offered him redemption. "I'm about to find out." After he hung up, the room was silent except for the storm's fury. Stone picked up the pen and stared at the signature line that would end one life and potentially begin another. "Dr. Williams," he said without looking up, "I need to know something before I sign this." "What's that?" "If I stay and work for you, If I try to learn what I should have learned years ago, will you be patient with me? Because I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to say things wrong, do things wrong. 52 years of thinking one way doesn't change overnight. Yvonne leaned forward. Mr. Stone, do you know why I really bought your company? To punish me. To save it. Her voice was soft but certain. This company employs 8,000 people. It has contracts in 37 countries. It has the potential to do enormous good or enormous harm, depending on who's making the decisions. She gestured toward the window where the storm was beginning to weaken. My father cleaned these floors for 3 years. He used to tell me about the important meetings that happened above his head, the decisions that affected thousands of lives. He dreamed that someday, someone who understood struggle would be making those decisions. And you think I can learn to understand struggle? I think, Yvonne said carefully, that losing everything you've built in one day might be the beginning of understanding. Stone looked at Rebecca Patterson, brilliant, forgiving Rebecca who'd flown through a storm to be here for his reckoning. Ms. Patterson, if I sign this and somehow earn the right to stay, would you work with me? Not for me, with me. As an equal. Rebecca studied his face with the intensity of someone trying to decode a complex algorithm. Mr. Stone, 3 months ago you fired me for suggesting that qualified people deserved opportunities regardless of their race. If you can truly learn that lesson, not just say it, but live it, then yes. I'll work with you. And Marcus? Stone turned to his head of security. Will you help me become someone worthy of the loyalty you've shown me? Marcus straightened, every inch the military officer he'd once been. Sir, I took an oath to protect this company and the people in it. If you're genuinely committed to changing, then yes, sir. I'll help you become the leader this company deserves. Stone felt something shifting inside his chest. Not quite hope yet, but something that might become hope with time and work and genuine effort. He signed the contract. The moment the pen left the paper, thunder crashed outside with such violence that the building's emergency generators flickered. When the lights steadied, Stone realized he was no longer the owner of Stone Enterprises. He was just Alexander Stone, a man with everything to prove and nothing left to lose. What happens now? He asked quietly. Yvonne stood and extended her hand across the table. Now you start over. Junior consultant, like I said. You'll work directly under Rebecca's supervision, learning strategic planning and inclusive business practices. Marcus will be your mentor on leadership and company culture. Stone shook her hand, feeling the strange sensation of his entire world shifting on its axis. And Dr. Williams? What should I call you now that you're my boss? For the first time since she'd entered the room 12 hours earlier, Yvonne Williams smiled, not the sharp, calculating expression of before, but something warm and genuine and full of possibility. You can call me Yvonne. We're going to be working together for a very long time, Alexander. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to break. Shafts of late afternoon sunlight cut through the clouds like promises of better weather ahead. Stone looked around the room one more time, at the torn check that had started this day, at the contract that had ended his old life, at the 3 people who'd somehow managed to destroy and save him simultaneously. Tomorrow he would start over. Tomorrow he would begin the long process of earning back his daughter's respect and learning what it meant to build rather than exclude. But today, for the first time in decades, Alexander Stone felt like he might actually deserve a second chance. 1 hour after the contract signing, the storm had moved on, leaving Manhattan gleaming under unexpected sunshine that made the city look newly washed and full of possibility. But inside the conference room, the real storm was just beginning. Alexander Stone sat in what had been his chair 12 hours ago, now officially the most junior employee in a company that no longer bore his name. The irony wasn't lost on him, or anyone else in the room. There's something else, Yvonne said, her voice carrying a weight that made everyone look up from the post-signing paperwork. Something I haven't told you. She walked to her briefcase and pulled out another folder, this one thicker than all the others, bound with a red ribbon that suggested it contained secrets rather than evidence. Alexander, you asked me earlier why I chose 47 million. I told you it was the amount of Rebecca's rejected settlement, but that wasn't the complete truth. Stone felt his newly fragile composure crack slightly. What do you mean? The complete truth is that 47 million was also the exact amount my father earned in his lifetime. 40 years of cleaning floors, working 3 jobs, sacrificing everything for my education. His total lifetime earnings came to 47 million and 12 cents. The room went dead silent. I had it calculated by forensic accountants. Every paycheck, every overtime hour, every Christmas bonus he spent on my school supplies instead of his own needs. 47 million, 12 cents. Stone stared at the folder in Yvonne's hands, sensing that whatever was inside would change everything again. So when I bought your company for exactly that amount, I wasn't just delivering justice for Rebecca. I was delivering justice for every man and woman, like my father, who built the buildings you worked in, cleaned the offices you profited from, and died never knowing that their children would someday have the power to rewrite the rules. Yvonne untied the ribbon and opened the folder, revealing not documents but photographs. Old, faded photographs of a man in janitor's coveralls standing in front of a building Stone recognized immediately. This is my father, James Williams, on his first day working at Stone Tower. 1987, the same year your father hired him. Stone's blood went cold. My father hired your father? More than hired him. Your father, Harrison Stone Jr., personally selected my father from a pool of candidates because James Williams was the only applicant who could read and write in 3 languages. Your father wanted someone who could communicate with the international clients who visited the building late at night. The implications hit Stone like a freight train. Your father worked for my family for 3 years. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Yvonne's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she turned through the photographs. He saved every paycheck stub, every performance review, every letter of commendation from your father praising his dedication and intelligence. She pulled out a yellowed letter on Stone Enterprises letterhead, dated December 1989. This is the last letter your father wrote about mine. Would you like me to read it? Stone nodded, not trusting his voice. James Williams represents the finest qualities of integrity, intelligence, and dedication that I have ever encountered in an employee. His insights into international business practices have proven invaluable, and his suggestions for building maintenance and security have saved this company considerable expense. I cannot recommend him highly enough for advancement to a supervisory position. Stone's hands were shaking now. What happened? Why did he leave? Yvonne turned to the final page in the folder, and Stone saw his own handwriting, younger, more confident, full of the arrogance that had defined his 20s. You happened, Alexander. She held up a memo dated January 1990, written by a 25-year-old Alexander Stone to his father. Dad, I've reviewed the candidates for the new building services manager position. While James Williams has adequate experience, I have concerns about promoting someone from the custodial staff to a supervisory role overseeing professional contractors. It might send the wrong message about company hierarchy and professional standards. I recommend we look for someone with a more traditional management background. A. Stone. The words on the page might as well have been written in Stone's blood. He remembered writing that memo, casually, thoughtlessly, never imagining that 33 years later he would be confronted with its consequences. My father never got that promotion, Yvonne continued. Your father, who respected my father's abilities, deferred to your judgment about professional standards. 6 months later, the stress of working 3 jobs to compensate for the raise he didn't get contributed to his first heart attack. Stone couldn't breathe. The room was spinning, and he could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. But here's the thing that will really interest you, Alexander. Yvonne pulled out one final document, a medical record from Mount Sinai Hospital, dated February 14th, 1990. The night my father had his heart attack, he was rushed to the emergency room at Mount Sinai. The attending physician that night was Dr. Rebecca Stone, your mother. The revelation hit Stone like a physical blow. His mother, the woman who'd taught him about compassion, who'd dedicated her life to healing, had treated Yvonne's father on the worst night of his life. She saved his life, Yvonne said quietly. Your mother worked for 6 hours to stabilize my father after his heart attack. She personally monitored his recovery, made sure he got the best possible care, even arranged for reduced-cost follow-up treatment. Stone was crying now, ugly, broken sobs that shook his entire body. My mother, she never told me, because she didn't know who he was. She just saw a man who needed help and gave it without question. The way she gave help to everyone, regardless of their ability to pay or the color of their skin. Rebecca Patterson, who had been silent through this revelation, finally spoke up. Mr. Stone, do you understand what this means? Stone looked up through his tears, seeing the three people in the room with new eyes, not as his accusers or his judges, but as the children of a story that had been decades in the making. It means, he said slowly, that your father and my mother tried to save your father's life while my prejudice nearly cost it. It means, Yvonne corrected gently, that despite everything, despite your family's failures and your father's deference to your bigotry and your own thoughtless cruelty, love still found a way to break through. My father lived for 16 more years because your mother refused to let him die. She sat back down across from Stone, her expression softer than it had been all day. My father used to tell me about that night at the hospital, about the white doctor who stayed with him when she could have gone home, who held his hand when he was scared, who promised him he would live to see his daughter graduate from college. What did he say about her? He said she was an angel who reminded him that not all people with power use it to hurt others. Some use it to heal. Stone thought about his mother, brilliant, compassionate Dr. Rebecca Stone, who'd raised him to believe in equality and justice, who died when he was 30 never knowing that her son had spent his adult life betraying everything she'd taught him. She would be ashamed of me, he whispered. Yes, Yvonne said simply. She would be. But she would also believe you could change because she believed everyone deserved a chance at redemption. Marcus stepped forward from his position by the door. Sir, if I may, this changes things. How? Because now this isn't just about business or even about justice. This is about honoring the people who came before us, your mother, Yvonne's father, all the people who tried to build bridges while others built walls. Stone looked around the room one more time, understanding finally clicking into place like the last piece of an impossibly complex puzzle. The 47 million, he said. It wasn't just about your father's lifetime earnings or Rebecca's settlement. It was about the exact amount my prejudice cost your family over 3 decades. Compound interest included, Yvonne confirmed. But Alexander, here's what I hope you understand now. I didn't take your company to destroy you. I took it to honor my father's memory and your mother's legacy, to prove that the bridges they tried to build could still be completed. Outside, the sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the city in shades of gold and possibility. Stone realized that somewhere in the last 12 hours, he had died and been reborn, not as the powerful businessman he'd thought he was, but as the man his mother had tried to raise and her patient had hoped he might become. What happens now? He asked, but this time the question carried hope instead of fear. Yvonne smiled, the first genuinely warm smile she'd given him all day. Now we get to work. We have a company to rebuild, a legacy to honor, and 47 million reasons to get it right this time. The conference room door opened, and sunlight streamed in, washing away the shadows of the storm and illuminating the path forward for four people whose lives had been bound together by loss, prejudice, healing, and the possibility of redemption. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But today, for the first time in decades, Alexander Stone felt like he might be worthy of the love his mother had tried to teach him and the respect his father's employee had never stopped hoping he would earn. 6 weeks later, Alexander Stone arrived at his former building at 6:47 a.m., carrying 2 cups of coffee and the kind of nervous energy that comes with knowing you're about to be tested in ways you never imagined. The lobby that had once whispered his name in marble and gold now displayed a different message. Excellence through inclusion, building tomorrow together. He took the elevator to the 40th floor, the same floor that had burned 6 weeks ago, now completely rebuilt as the company's new community impact center. His destination was Conference Room C, where he would present his first major project as junior strategic consultant to the woman who now owned everything he'd once controlled. The irony still took his breath away some mornings. "Morning, Alexander." Yvonne Williams looked up from her tablet as he entered, accepting the coffee with the easy familiarity they'd developed over 6 weeks of intensive collaboration. "Ready for the big presentation?" "As ready as someone can be when they're about to present a diversity initiative to a room full of people they spent decades excluding," Stone replied, settling into the chair that had once been reserved for visitors and was now his permanent spot. The transformation hadn't been easy. The first week, Stone had made 17 different mistakes, from using outdated terminology that made people wince to accidentally interrupting the only black woman in a strategy meeting 3 times in 20 minutes. Each mistake had been a small humiliation, a reminder of how much he didn't know about navigating a world where his voice wasn't automatically the most important one in the room. But he'd learned, painfully, slowly, with the patience of mentors who had every reason to give up on him, but chose not to. "Nervous?" Yvonne asked, studying his face with the diagnostic precision she'd developed over their weeks working together. "Terrified," Stone admitted, "but not for the reasons you might think." "What do you mean?" Stone looked out the window at the city below, the same view he'd had from his penthouse office, but somehow everything looked different now. "I'm not scared of failing, Yvonne. I'm scared of succeeding. Because if this presentation goes well, if the board approves my recommendations, it means I've actually learned something. It means I might actually be capable of change. And if that's true," he trailed off, but Yvonne understood. "If that's true, then you have to confront how much damage you could have prevented if you'd been willing to learn 30 years ago." "Exactly." The conference room door opened, and the new executive team began filtering in. Rebecca Patterson entered first, now Chief Strategy Officer, her confidence and competence undeniable to anyone with eyes to see. Marcus Thompson followed, his promotion to VP of Corporate Culture, making him one of the most respected voices in the company. Behind them came the expanded board of directors, a group that now included voices that had never been heard in Stone's previous incarnation. But it was the last person to enter who made Stone's heart skip a beat. "Dad!" Rebecca Stone, his daughter, stood in the doorway wearing a visitor's badge and the cautious expression of someone testing whether the ground beneath their feet was solid. "Becca!" Stone rose from his chair, his voice catching. "What are you doing here?" "Yvonne invited me. She said you were presenting something important today, and she thought I might want to see who you're becoming." The last 6 weeks had been the longest stretch Stone had gone without speaking to his daughter since she was born. Every attempt at contact had been met with polite but distant responses. Rebecca was willing to give him time to prove he'd changed, but she wasn't willing to pretend everything was fine while he figured it out. "Becca, I don't know if you should." "Mr. Stone." Rebecca Patterson's voice cut through his uncertainty. "With respect, your daughter flew here from Seattle to see this presentation. She has every right to witness whether her father has learned anything. Stone looked around the room at faces that had become familiar over the past 6 weeks. People who'd watched him stumble through basic concepts of inclusive leadership, who'd corrected his assumptions with patience he didn't deserve, who'd somehow managed to see potential in a man who'd spent decades proving he didn't deserve their faith. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's see if I've learned anything worth sharing." Stone moved to the front of the room, his hands steadier than he'd expected. The presentation materials were simple, no flashy graphics or impressive data visualizations. Just truth, carefully researched and honestly presented. "6 weeks ago," he began, "I lost this company because I made business decisions based on prejudice rather than merit. Today, I want to present a strategic initiative that I believe will prevent other companies from making the same catastrophic mistakes." He clicked to his first slide, "The True Cost of Discrimination, a Case Study in Strategic Failure." This presentation details how systematic exclusion cost the former Stone enterprises approximately $340 million over 10 years. But more importantly, it outlines a framework for building what I'm calling inclusion intelligence, the ability to recognize and eliminate bias from business decision-making. Stone walked through his analysis methodically, detailing every instance where his prejudice had cost the company money, talent, and opportunities. He didn't spare himself or try to soften the impact. Each slide was a confession, each data point an admission of failure. But as he progressed through the presentation, something remarkable happened. The room's energy began to shift from skeptical attention to genuine engagement. "The Patterson supply chain analysis alone would have saved us $23 million annually," Stone explained, gesturing to Rebecca Patterson. "But I dismissed it without proper review because I was more focused on who was presenting than what was being presented." He clicked to a new section, the Marcus Thompson Leadership Model. "My head of security, Marcus Thompson, developed innovative approaches to corporate culture and employee retention. His strategies could have reduced our annual turnover costs by $12 million. But I blocked his promotion for 3 years because I was worried about optics rather than focusing on results." Marcus shifted slightly in his seat, his expression carefully neutral, but Stone caught the flicker of something that might have been hope. Stone moved to his final section, and his voice became quieter, more personal. "But the most significant cost of discrimination isn't financial. It's human. Every person I excluded, every talent I dismissed, every perspective I ignored, those were real people with real contributions to make. The daughter who watched her father work 18-hour days trying to prove his worth. The goddaughter who called her mentor crying, asking what she'd done wrong. The colleagues who wondered if their race or gender would always matter more than their results." He looked directly at his daughter Rebecca, sitting in the back of the room. The children who had to question whether their parents were the people they thought they were. The room was completely silent now. "So my recommendation isn't just about implementing better hiring practices or diversity training. It's about fundamentally changing how we define success, how we measure worth, and how we build organizations that bring out the best in everyone, not just people who look like the person in charge." Stone clicked to his final slide, moving forward, a commitment to continuous learning. "I will never be perfect at this. I will make mistakes, use wrong terminology, miss perspectives I should have considered. But I commit to learning from every mistake, to listening more than I speak, and to using whatever privilege and platform I still have to amplify voices that have been ignored for too long." He set down his clicker and looked around the room. "That's my presentation. Questions?" The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Then Marcus Thompson raised his hand. "Alexander, I have a question." Stone nodded, bracing himself. "What happens if we implement all these changes and the company becomes more successful than it ever was under the old system?" How do we make sure you don't slip back into old patterns when things are going well? It was the question Stone had been dreading and hoping for simultaneously. We build accountability into everything we do, he said simply. We create systems that make discrimination impossible, not just discouraged. We measure success by how well we develop all our talent, not just some of it. And we remember that the moment we think we've learned enough is the moment we stop growing. Rebecca Patterson leaned forward. Alexander, why should we trust that this transformation is real and not just performance? Stone looked at the woman whose career he'd nearly destroyed, whose brilliance he'd dismissed, whose goddaughter relationship with Yvonne had set this entire transformation in motion. Because, he said quietly, I've lost everything I thought mattered and discovered that the only thing that actually matters is whether I can become someone worth trusting. You shouldn't trust me because of what I say. You should watch what I do, and if my actions don't match my words, you should remove me from any position where I can do harm. The room erupted into discussion, board members asking detailed questions about implementation, timelines, measurement metrics. But Stone's attention was focused on his daughter, who was walking toward the front of the room with tears in her eyes. Dad! Yeah, sweetheart? That was the man I remember from when I was little. The one who taught me that everyone deserves respect. Stone felt something break open in his chest, not breaking apart, but breaking open, like dawn breaking over a landscape that had been dark for too long. I'm trying to find my way back to him, Becca. It's harder than I thought it would be. Good, she said, surprising him with the firmness in her voice. It should be hard. If it were easy, it wouldn't mean anything. Around them, the room continued buzzing with plans and possibilities. Yvonne approached, her expression unreadable. Well, Stone asked, did I pass the test? Alexander, she said, and for the first time in weeks, her smile reached her eyes. I think you just passed the most important test of all. Which was? You stopped trying to prove you weren't racist and started proving you could be actively anti-racist. There's a difference. Outside the conference room windows, Manhattan hummed with the energy of 8 million people pursuing their dreams, building their futures, creating the kind of world where talent and character mattered more than background and bias. Stone looked around the room at people who had every reason to doubt him, but chose instead to invest in his potential for growth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove himself. But today, for the first time in months, Alexander Stone felt like he might actually deserve the second chance he'd been given. The storm had passed, leaving Manhattan glistening under emergency floodlights. Through the rain-streaked windows, Alexander Stone could see the media circus had tripled in size. Satellite trucks lined the streets like mechanical predators, their dishes pointed skyward, ready to broadcast his destruction to the world. The $47 million contract lay before him, now accompanied by 2 additional documents that had arrived during the lockdown. Rebecca's partnership agreement and Marcus's promotion papers. 3 pieces of paper that would either redeem him or complete his humiliation. But it was the 4th document, one that had arrived just minutes ago, that made his hands shake. Read it aloud, Yvonne said quietly. She sat across from him, no longer the avenging angel who'd walked into his conference room that morning, but a woman who looked as exhausted as he felt. Everyone should hear this. Stone picked up the letter, recognizing his daughter's handwriting immediately. Dad, I've been sitting in my apartment for 6 hours, watching the news, reading the articles, trying to reconcile the man they're describing with the father who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with calculus homework. I keep thinking about Marcus. Do you remember when I was 16 and those guys tried to mug me outside the theater? Marcus didn't just save me. He stayed with me in the hospital, called Mom when you were in Tokyo, made sure I wasn't alone. He's been like family to us for 12 years. And you blocked his promotion because of his race. I can't process that, Dad. The man who raised me to believe in fairness and merit deliberately held back someone who deserved success. Someone who protected your daughter. Dr. Williams called me an hour ago. She told me about the choice you're facing. She said she believes people can change, but that change requires more than words. It requires sacrifice. So here's what I need from you, Dad. I need you to prove that the man who taught me right from wrong still exists. I need you to show me that love is stronger than fear, that doing right matters more than being right. I need you to sign those papers. All of them. I need you to come home as someone I can be proud to call my father. I love you, but love isn't enough anymore. I need you to be better. Rebecca. Stone's voice cracked on his daughter's name. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of sirens and the persistent buzz of his phone. Reporters, investors, his entire world demanding answers. Rebecca Patterson spoke first. She sounds like an extraordinary young woman. She is. Stone folded the letter carefully, his movements deliberate and slow. She's everything good I've ever done in this world. Marcus stepped forward from his position by the door. Sir, if I may, your daughter saved my son's life once too. Stone looked up, confused. What? 2 years ago. Tommy, my boy, he was getting bullied at school. Bad stuff. Kids were calling him names, telling him his daddy was just the help for rich white people. Marcus's voice was steady, but Stone could see the pain in his eyes. Tommy was talking about hurting himself. The room went deadly quiet. Your daughter found out somehow. She showed up at Tommy's school, this rich white girl in her private school uniform, and she sat with him at lunch. Every day for a month. She didn't make a big deal about it, didn't want credit. She just made sure my son knew he mattered. Stone felt something break inside his chest. Marcus, I never knew. She told Tommy that her father had taught her that real strength comes from protecting people who can't protect themselves. That the measure of a man isn't what he takes, but what he gives. Marcus met Stone's eyes directly. I've been wondering for 12 years if that man really existed, or if it was just something she wanted to believe about you. The weight of Marcus's words settled over the room like a physical presence. Stone realized that this moment, this choice, wasn't just about his company or his reputation. It was about whether the man his daughter believed in had ever really existed at all. The conference room door opened one final time, and Stone's assistant Jennifer walked in. Behind her came a steady stream of people, employees, partners, investors, filling the room until it was standing room only. Jennifer? Stone stood, confused. What is this? The staff wanted to be here for this, Jennifer said simply. All of us. We know you're about to make a decision that will affect all our futures. Stone looked around the crowded room, seeing faces he'd worked with for years, but had never really seen. Maria from accounting, whose promotion he'd delayed because she'd seemed too aggressive. James from marketing, whose ideas he'd dismissed because they didn't fit his vision of the company culture. Susan from HR, who'd tried repeatedly to bring diversity concerns to his attention, only to be told it wasn't the right time. Why? He asked. After everything that's come out today, why would you want to be here? Jennifer exchanged a look with several other employees before answering. Because some of us have been waiting 12 years to see if you'd find the courage to do the right thing. She pulled out a thick folder and set it on the table next to the contracts. These are letters, Mr. Stone, from every employee who's ever been passed over, overlooked, or undervalued in this company because of their race, gender, or background. We've been collecting them for years. Stone's blood went cold. You've been documenting everything, Jennifer confirmed. Every discriminatory comment, every biased decision, every time someone deserved better and didn't get it because they didn't look like your idea of success. The folder seemed to pulse with accusation, thick with years of silent documentation. But we also wrote these, Jennifer continued, pulling out a second, smaller folder. Letters about the times you got it right. The scholarship program you started for underprivileged kids. The disaster relief funding you approved without hesitation. The way you stood by employees going through personal crises. She opened the smaller folder, and Stone saw page after page of testimonials. Moments of decency he'd forgotten, acts of kindness that had mattered to people in ways he'd never realized. "The question," Jennifer said quietly, "is which man are you going to choose to be going forward?" Yvonne stood slowly, her movements weighted with the gravity of the moment. "Mr. Stone, I need you to understand something. This was never about destroying you. It was about saving everyone you were destroying, including yourself." She walked to the window, looking down at the street where her father had once worked as a janitor. "My father used to tell me that every person has two wolves inside them, one that feeds on fear, prejudice, and pride, and one that feeds on love, justice, and courage. The wolf that wins is the one you choose to feed." She turned back to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "For 30 years, you've been feeding the wrong wolf, Mr. Stone. But it's not too late. It's never too late to starve fear and start feeding love." Stone looked around the room at all these people. Employees who'd endured his unconscious cruelty, competitors who'd become allies, strangers who'd become mirrors. He thought about his daughter, waiting for him to become the man she needed him to be. He thought about Marcus, protecting his family for 12 years while being denied the recognition he'd earned. He thought about Rebecca, brilliant and broken by his casual dismissal of her worth. Stone picked up the pen and looked at the 3 contracts before him. The room held its collective breath. "If I sign these," he said slowly, "what guarantees do I have? How do I know you won't just take my company and cast me aside?" Yvonne smiled, not the razor-sharp smile of earlier, but something warmer, more hopeful. "You don't. That's what makes this a choice about character rather than strategy. You have to choose to trust people you've never trusted before. You have to choose to believe that doing right matters more than being safe." Stone's phone buzzed one final time. A text from his daughter. "Whatever you decide, Dad, I love you. But I need you to decide based on who you want to be, not who you've been." He set the phone down and looked directly at Marcus. 12 years ago, you took a bullet for me in Jakarta. You never asked for anything in return. Not recognition, not reward, just the chance to do your job with dignity." Marcus nodded slowly. "I failed you. I failed your son. I failed the man you believed I could be." Stone's voice was steady now, resolved. "I can't undo 12 years of cowardice, but I can stop being a coward today." He signed Marcus's promotion papers first, his signature bold and clear. Then he turned to Rebecca. "You offered me excellence, and I gave you exile. You deserved a partner, and I gave you prejudice." He signed her partnership agreement, each letter of his name feeling like a small act of redemption. Finally, he looked at Yvonne, the woman who'd held up a mirror and forced him to see himself clearly for the first time in decades. "Dr. Williams, I don't know if I can ever become the man you think I can be, but I know I can't continue being the man I've been." He signed the transfer agreement, signing away his empire and signing up for the hardest work of his life, learning to see people as they truly are, not as his prejudices had painted them. The room erupted in applause, not celebration but relief. The collective exhale of people who'd been holding their breath for years, waiting for justice, waiting for change, waiting for someone to choose courage over comfort. 3 months later, Sterling Capital Headquarters, Manhattan. The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, revealing a reception area that hummed with purposeful energy. Alexander Stone stepped out, straightening his tie, not the $500 Italian silk he'd once favored, but a simple blue one his daughter had given him for his birthday. In his hands, he carried a worn leather portfolio containing 3 months' worth of work that would have been unimaginable to him a year ago. "Mr. Stone?" The receptionist, a young Latina woman with kind eyes, looked up from her desk. Dr. Williams is ready for you in conference room B. Thank you, Sophia. Stone had learned everyone's name, not just the executives, but the security guards, the cleaning staff, the cafeteria workers. It had taken 3 months to understand that knowing someone's name was the first step toward seeing their humanity. He walked down hallways lined with photographs that told a different story than the ones that had once adorned Stone Tower. These walls celebrated diversity of thought and background, images of the company's partnerships with minority-owned businesses, the scholarship recipients from underprivileged communities, the innovative solutions that came from teams that looked like the world they served. Conference room B was smaller than the war room, where his empire had been dismantled, but it felt infinitely larger. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a table where 5 people sat waiting for him. The new board of Stone Enterprises, now a subsidiary of Sterling Capital. Yvonne Williams sat at the head of the table, her presence as commanding as ever but somehow warmer. To her right sat Rebecca Patterson, who'd returned from London 2 months ago to take her partnership role. Marcus Thompson occupied the seat that should have been his years ago, wearing the confidence of a man finally recognized for his true worth. Jennifer sat across from him, not as an assistant, but as the newly appointed Director of Human Resources, tasked with rebuilding the company's culture from the ground up. And at the far end of the table sat someone Stone hadn't expected, his daughter Rebecca, home from graduate school for spring break, her laptop open and her attention focused on the presentation materials spread before her. "Dad." She looked up as he entered, her smile cautious but genuine. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous," Stone admitted, settling into the only empty chair, positioned not at the head of the table, but in the middle, where he could see and be seen by everyone. "It's been a long time since I've had to prove myself to anyone." "Welcome to the real world," Rebecca Patterson said with a slight smile, "where merit actually matters." Stone opened his portfolio and pulled out a thick report bound in simple black covers. "3 months ago, you asked me to conduct a comprehensive audit of Stone Enterprises' business practices and recommend changes that would align with our new values. This is what I found." He distributed copies of the report around the table, his hands steadier than they'd been in months. Page 1 contains what I'm calling the Accountability Index, a detailed breakdown of every discriminatory practice I identified during my 30 years as CEO. There are 127 documented instances where qualified candidates were passed over due to unconscious or conscious bias. Yvonne flipped through the pages, her expression unreadable. "You documented your own discrimination?" "Someone had to." Stone's voice was quiet but firm. "I spent 3 months interviewing former employees, reviewing hiring records, and analyzing promotion patterns. What I found was comprehensive prejudice disguised as business judgment." He turned to a specific page and began reading. "Jerome Washington, petroleum engineer, MIT graduate. Interviewed 3 times between 2018 and 2021. My notes from his final interview read, "Technically qualified but doesn't seem like Stone material. Cultural fit concerns." What I meant was that he didn't look like me. The room was deadly quiet. Keisha Johnson, Harvard Law, corporate litigation specialist. My notation, aggressive presentation style. Might alienate traditional clients. Translation, she was confident in a way that made me uncomfortable because she was a black woman who refused to diminish herself. Stone continued through the list, each entry a small act of self-prosecution, a public accounting for decades of unconscious cruelty. David Chun, Stanford MBA. My note, impressive credentials but questionable communication style. I rejected a man who spoke 4 languages because his accent reminded me that he wasn't from here. When he finished, the silence stretched until Marcus cleared his throat. "Mr. Stone, why are you telling us this? You could have just started over. Pretended the old Alexander Stone never existed." Stone looked around the table at these people who'd given him a chance he didn't deserve. Because pretending the old me never existed would be another form of privilege. It would let me avoid accountability for the harm I caused. He met each person's eyes directly. Redemption without reckoning isn't redemption. It's just rebranding. Yvonne leaned forward. What else is in the report? Stone turned to the second section. Recommendations for systemic change. Not just policies, but practices. Not just diversity hiring, but inclusive advancement. Not just representation, but real power sharing. He outlined his proposals. Mentorship programs pairing senior executives with high-potential employees from underrepresented backgrounds. Partnerships with historically black colleges and universities. Supply chain restructuring to prioritize minority-owned businesses. And most importantly, regular audits by external diversity consultants who would have the power to override executive decisions. In essence, Stone concluded, I'm recommending that we institutionalize the checks and balances I needed but never accepted. No single person, including me, should ever again have the power to let unconscious bias drive business decisions. Jennifer spoke for the first time. These recommendations would fundamentally change how the company operates. Good, Stone replied. The old way was broken. The old way hurt people. The old way made me complicit in a system that told brilliant people they weren't worthy because they didn't look like success to me. His daughter Rebecca closed her laptop and looked directly at him. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you really believe you can change, or are you just doing what you think we want to hear? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Stone realized that this moment, not the contract signing, not the media circus, was the real test. His daughter, the person who knew him best, was asking if his transformation was genuine or performative. 3 months ago, Stone said slowly, I would have given you the answer I thought you wanted to hear. I would have told you I was committed to change while privately believing I was being unfairly persecuted. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But something happened 2 weeks ago that showed me how deep this work really goes. I was in line at a coffee shop, and the barista, a young black man, was taking longer than usual with a complicated order. The man in front of me started getting agitated, muttering about these people, and why can't they just work faster? Stone looked around the table. 6 months ago, I probably would have agreed with him, silently, but I would have agreed. Instead, I found myself stepping forward and telling the agitated customer that the barista was doing his job well and deserved respect. What happened? Marcus asked. The customer turned on me, called me a bleeding heart liberal, said I'd been brainwashed by political correctness. And for a moment, I felt that old familiar anger, the defensiveness that comes when someone challenges your worldview. Stone's voice grew quieter. But then I looked at the barista, this kid who couldn't have been more than 19, and I saw the way he was trying not to react, trying to stay professional while being humiliated in public. And I realized that this was what it felt like to be on the right side of an ugly moment. He met his daughter's eyes directly. I can't promise you I'll never have another unconscious bias. I can't promise I'll never make another mistake based on privilege I don't recognize. But I can promise you that I'm finally awake to the work, and I'm committed to doing it for the rest of my life. Rebecca, his daughter, reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. That's all I needed to hear, Dad. Yvonne stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline where Stone Tower still rose like a monument to what had been. The board has reviewed your report, she said without turning around. We've decided to implement all of your recommendations. Stone felt relief wash over him. Thank you. I know it won't be easy. We're also offering you a permanent position, Yvonne continued, finally turning to face him. Not as an executive, not as a consultant, as Director of Institutional Accountability. Your job would be to continue this work, identifying bias, documenting discrimination, and ensuring that this company never again becomes a place where prejudice masquerades as business judgment. The offer hit Stone like a physical blow. You want me to police my own former company? I want you to help heal it, Yvonne corrected. You know where the bodies are buried because you buried them. You understand the mindset that creates discrimination because you lived in that mindset. Who better to prevent it from happening again? Rebecca Patterson leaned forward. It wouldn't be easy work, Mr. Stone. You'd be reporting directly to me, and I don't intend to be gentle just because we're partners now. You'd be challenged every day to confront not just the company's biases, but your own. Stone looked around the table at these 5 people who'd had every reason to destroy him and had instead chosen to redeem him. Why? He asked simply. After everything I've done, why give me this chance? Marcus answered first. Because 12 years ago, you took a bullet for me in Jakarta without thinking about my race. For 30 seconds, you saw me as just another human being worth protecting. I've been waiting 12 years to see that man again. Jennifer nodded. Because when my grandmother was dying, you personally drove me to the hospital and sat with me all night, even though I was just your assistant. That's the person I hoped you could become full-time. Rebecca Patterson smiled. Because when I was crying in London after you fired me, I wasn't just mourning my job. I was mourning the loss of someone I'd genuinely respected. If you can become that person again, consistently, authentically, then maybe other people can too. Yvonne returned to her seat, her expression softer than Stone had ever seen it. And because my father, who cleaned these floors for 3 years, used to tell me that every person deserves the chance to become who they're meant to be. You've spent 30 years being less than you could be, Alexander. But it's not too late to spend the next 30 years being more. Stone felt tears he hadn't shed since his father's funeral gathering in his eyes. If I take this job, he said carefully, I'll probably uncover things about myself that are ugly. I'll probably have to confront biases I don't even know I have yet. Probably, Yvonne agreed. I'll make mistakes. I'll backslide. I'll have days when I want to return to the comfortable ignorance of privilege. Definitely. And you'll all have to be patient with me while I learn to see the world through eyes that aren't clouded by a lifetime of assumptions. We will. Stone looked at his daughter, who was watching him with the careful hope of someone who'd learned not to expect too much, but couldn't quite stop believing in possibility. What do you think, sweetheart? Should your old man try to become someone worthy of the daughter he raised? Rebecca smiled, the first completely unguarded smile he'd seen from her in months. I think, she said, it's about time. Stone stood and walked to the window where Yvonne had stood moments before. 68 floors below, he could see people of every color and background moving through the streets of Manhattan, building lives, pursuing dreams, creating the future one choice at a time. There's one more thing, he said without turning around. The $47 million from the buyout. I want to establish a foundation with it, the Eleanor Blackstone Foundation for Economic Justice. It would provide capital and mentorship for minority entrepreneurs, fund scholarships for underprivileged students, and support organizations fighting systemic discrimination. He turned back to face the room. I can't undo 30 years of unconscious cruelty, but maybe I can spend the rest of my life making sure other people get the chances I denied them. The room erupted in applause, not the polite corporate clapping of board meetings, but the genuine appreciation of people witnessing authentic transformation. As the meeting ended and people began to file out, Yvonne approached him. Alexander, she said quietly, I want you to know something. When I first started investigating your company, I was looking for a villain. What I found instead was a man who'd lost his way. Thank you for finding your way back. Stone shook her hand, then surprised them both by pulling her into a brief, respectful hug. Thank you for not giving up on the possibility of redemption. Your father would be proud. As the elevator doors closed behind him, Alexander Stone looked at his reflection in the polished steel. The man looking back at him was older, humbler, and infinitely more hopeful than the one who'd woken up to a burning building 12 hours and 3 months ago. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Tommy got into Columbia. Full scholarship. He says he wants to work for a company that sees people for who they really are. Stone smiled and typed back, "Tell him there's a place waiting for him here. And tell him his father is the finest man I've ever known." Outside, Manhattan hummed with the energy of 8 million people building tomorrow, one choice at a time. And for the first time in 30 years, Alexander Stone was proud to be one of them.